Hello, everybody. So, looks like there's going to be some more people coming, so we'll take it slow getting started here. But let's just take a moment as usual to meditatively arrive. Oh, I also have to grab my notes. One moment. So let's take a moment to meditatively arrive. Just tune into the body. You can close your eyes if you'd like. Feel the breath. The in-breath calling you into the body, and the out-breath settling you in the body. And just let that bring you deeper into the body. And then take a moment to feel your hands and feet and to feel like you are at one with the body, all of you together in one place, consciously unified. And then I'll say the bracha on Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, source of being, who has given us so many ways to connect to you. One of which is to delve into your revelation in the Torah, to work into the Torah and to be absorbed in its study and its exploration. So today we are looking at the treatment of animals in the Jewish tradition. So yesterday we looked at animal souls. And regardless of exactly how one defines the soul of animals or exactly how one looks at their existence in the divine image, consistently throughout the Jewish tradition, there's a sense that how we relate to animals is a matter of ethical importance. And so starting from the Tanakh all the way through Jewish tradition, there's discussion about this. And I wanted to kind of review some of the main points of Jewish ideas about ethical behavior towards animals. So Jewish law prohibits cruelty to animals. This is called Ba'al Tzarei Chaim, to not cause suffering to living things. And it's a principle in the Talmud and in Jewish law in general that one should avoid causing pain to animals, that one should certainly not be cruel or cause any unnecessary pain to animals. So Torah law, for instance, has a care for things like not muzzling animals while they're working on the farm, which would prevent them from being able to eat. And two famous sort of mysterious mitzvos from the Hebrew Bible. The first one, not taking the life of a mother and child together. And the second one, not cooking a child animal in its mother's milk. The second one, of course, apparently it was a delicacy in the ancient Near East to cook a kid or a baby goat in its mother's milk. And this is mentioned a few times. It almost seems like, if you read the Hebrew Bible straightforwardly as the voice of Hashem, it almost seems like this is something which really annoys Hashem, because in the book of Shemot, for instance, there will be other laws that have nothing to do with animals. And then suddenly in the middle of it, all of a sudden there will be a pause and it will be like, by the way, don't cook baby animals in their mother's milk. And then the laws will just continue on another topic. So it seems like this is something really like, this is just distasteful, guys. Like, don't do this. And of course, we span that out, the rabbis span that out into all of the laws of meat and milk, which are quite extensive and elaborate and go way beyond, the original law. But the original law seems to have been to prevent this one particular culinary practice. Kosher slaughter laws have long been regarded as being formulated to avoid causing pain during slaughter as much as possible. This is why the knife of the shochet, the knife of the slaughterer, has to be so unbelievably sharp in order for it to be kosher, so that when you kill the animal, you can slice through its veins and arteries in one movement and cut off the flow of blood to the brain, thus minimizing the experience of pain and trauma, it's thought. Wild animals have the right to enter fields to eat during the Shemitah year. So during the Shemitah year, you're not supposed to harvest. You're not supposed to work the fields. To be more specific, you're not supposed to farm those fields. But it says that wild animals can come in and glean. So the earth has a rest during the Shemitah year, but also wild animals are able to come in and glean from your crops without being shooed away. When wild animals are caught and slaughtered, their blood is given a burial, like we mentioned previously, out of respect for the animal's soul. Although the laws of animal sacrifice, we talked about this yesterday, may strike us as violent and murderous towards animals, it should be noted that they massively reduced the amount of animal sacrifices done each year in the temple compared to Israel's neighbors, and also reduced meat eating by stipulating that animals to be eaten must be brought to the temple first. So it's not that every single animal that's killed has to be brought to the temple, but the larger animals, which are in the class of sacrificial animals, you can't just kill them in your backyard when you need to eat. You have to actually bring them to the temple to be offered as a sacrifice, which would be a real disincentive to eating a lot of meat. Because there's a lot of effort involved. And of course, it makes slaughtering and eating those animals no longer at all a casual act or at the whim of the person. It's something which has to be done in a proper sacred way. A famous story from the Talmud tells of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi being the one who oversaw the compilation of the Mishnah, being approached by a mournful calf seeking refuge from slaughter. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says to the calf, "Go, for you were made for this purpose." Listening angels, according to the Talmud, are unimpressed and say, "Since he shows no mercy, let afflictions come upon him." And they do. And Rabbi Yehuda has a whole series of afflictions and punishment which come upon him because of saying this to the calf. So I've always loved this story because, there is this tendency you could say in Abrahamic thought in general, and probably in other forms of religious thinking around the world, that animals are, made to be eaten. And here we have this story from the Talmud, which strongly chastises a rabbi who said that. There is an argument to be made that much of kosher law originally existed to protect the ecological integrity of ancient Israel. In other words, eating those particular animals would destabilize the ecology. For example, pigs tend to eat the underbrush and the little plants on the surface of the soil. And in an arid climate, that can lead to soil instability. That argument I read in a book many years ago by an anthropologist called, oh man, what was the name of the book? It was a really famous book for a while. I think it was called Wars, Pigs, and Witches or something like that. But the point of the book, not just in terms of Jewish law, the point of the book was to show how all of these different taboos that exist in indigenous cultures, including indigenous Jewish culture, have ecological rationalizations, or not rationalizations, have ecological resonances. And this is a really fascinating topic of study. So if you look even at, I remember reading of one South American tribe who there was a certain type of tree they were forbidden to cut down because they had this whole myth about how the spirit of the tree, had maybe gotten a certain boon from the tribe. And if you were to cut down the tree, you would be disrespecting this particular spirit, and then it would bring curses of a certain type. But the anthropologist pointed out that this particular tree had an extremely important role in the ecological integrity of where they lived. And if they began cutting down that tree in order to build their houses, it would destabilize their whole economy. So this is an interesting argument about kosher law. And there are other examples beyond the pigs. And Rav Seidenberg actually has written about this a little bit on his website, neochassid.org. I'm going to write it in the chat. This is a website with tremendous resources on it. And you can find an article he wrote about about that possible explanation for kashrut. The interesting thing is that if this is true, then the correct application of kashrut today would in fact lie in not eating things that destabilize our own local or global ecologies. So this is the really sort of radical and subversive aspect of this argument, is that if that's correct, that that's what kosher law was about in ancient Israel, then keeping kosher in Vancouver is actually not a matter of not eating things that destabilize the Israeli ecology, but is a matter of not eating things that destabilize the British Columbian ecology and in our interconnected world today, the global ecology. So as Jewish philosophy developed, it may surprise us to know that the sense of the moral significance of animals actually decreased. And the mitzvot about cruelty to animals came to be seen as existing to train human character, not to protect animals. In other words, as Jewish philosophy developed, particularly in discussion with Greco-Roman and Muslim theology, and became more intellectualized and actually further away from the Hebrew Bible, this sense of the moral significance of animals actually decreased. The thinking of medieval philosophers was so anthropocentric that there actually came to be a sense that when the Hebrew Bible tells us to be kind to animals, it's to train us to be better people, not because the animals are significant. The Rambam, however, we're talking about Maimonides again, the arch philosopher of Judaism, disagreed with this approach, which is quite interesting. And he wrote, "It is forbidden to slaughter an animal and its young on the same day, this being a precautionary measure to avoid slaughtering the young animal in front of its mother. For in these cases, animals feel very great pain, there being no difference regarding this pain between humankind and other animals." So the Rambam here is saying, it's not that you're supposed to follow this mitzvah just to train you to be a nice person, which is what some others were saying. He's saying, no, it's because the mother animal feels pain seeing its child eaten. And Peter, that's a really interesting question, which I want to return to in just a moment, because I also want you to explain to me exactly what you mean, and then I want to talk about that because I think that could be interesting. So I'm just going to read this last paragraph, and then I'll circle back to it. Rav Seidenberg brings a fascinating analysis to the famous statement in Bereshit that humans should guard and keep the garden, right? Lashomra ulavda, that we're supposed to guard and serve or work the Garden of Eden. But then the idea that we're to kibush, that we're to dominate all creatures. And we haven't really discussed this yet. It's the most famous, it's the verse in Genesis that gets brought out whenever somebody wants to make the argument that the Abrahamic traditions are anti-ecological. And it certainly is a problematic verse, although it's a shame that it's often taken without any consideration of the larger context. This is the same book where Hashem says, the land, the earth does not belong to you, it belongs to me. And every 7th year you will let the land rest, or I will cause it to vomit you out. It's important to be aware of the other verses that are said in the larger context and not just to focus on that one, especially because of the fact that we know that the Hebrew Bible was not written by one person, but was written by many people. And so it's not entirely consistent, in its opinions and its attempt to work out God's will. There's sometimes inconsistencies or competing voices. Anyway, so Rav Seidenberg on this verse says that since the Tanakh at this point assumes vegetarianism, when it says to dominate all animals, it cannot mean to kill and eat them. It must mean something else. Even more problematically, it cannot even mean to use them as farm animals because humans are still in Eden and do not engage in agriculture. So he points out this verse is maybe a little bit more mysterious than we might think. It's spoken to human beings who do not kill or eat animals or use them in agriculture. So what does it mean to dominate them? Rashi says that Adam would call them and they would come, for they were in his reshut, his domain. Seidenberg explains that Adam thus had the power to name and tame the animals. The picture we get was that humans were to be the benevolent namers and tamers of all animals, leaders above them all, but not originally to use them or kill them for food. So if you are trying to read all the verses in Bereshit in a way that they're consistent with each other, the picture you get is that human beings were indeed, at least in the imagination of those particular verses, human beings were to in some way be above animals, to not be controlled by them, to dominate them, to be the sort of leaders, and probably to act in a kind of priestly role towards them. But this did not include killing them, eating them, or using them in agriculture. So this domination is more of a sort of spiritual, priestly type of domination. Now that still might make us uncomfortable. We might say, what, spiritual, priestly domination of animals? But it's still interesting to realize that we're not talking about a violent agricultural or culinary domination of animals. So tomorrow we will look at our relationship to the creation beyond the animal. I've spent a lot of time talking about animals, and today I want to look at is our plants and minerals and rocks created in the divine image in some way, and what should our relationship to them be? And that's what we're going to look at tomorrow, which I'm really looking forward to, because Rav Seidenberg brings some really fascinating material about that I want to discuss with you. But for now, first of all, I want to circle back to Peter's question. I'm just going to say, Peter, I think what you're asking is, are we saying, when we talk about avoiding pain and cruelty to animals, are you asking the question, does this go beyond how we kill them and also talk about how we use them, like agriculturally or in other ways, or am I misunderstanding your question?
I had a different point of view on that. So the concept of kashrut extending on an ecological level is incredible, I think. And so I was wondering if it would extend beyond just what we eat to what we consume otherwise, such as trees and so on, or whatever we might find to be a keystone species to have an integral ecosystem around us, and how that might be, as we know more and more, quite a flexible system to extend our kashrut to how we behave as consumers of everything. Totally.
So there's a lot of people thinking about this, and there's two concepts that get brought to bear on it. Too bad. Oh, actually, Noam is here. So if he has anything to add, Noam has worked in this field for a long time. Maybe he can drop something in the chat or say something. So the first thing is Ba'al Tashchit, which is another rabbinic principle, which is not to waste or needlessly destroy. And it doesn't refer to animals, it refers to anything else. So at minimum, there is a rabbinic principle that, to needlessly destroy a tree or really anything is forbidden. And it's interesting, if you look at this in terms of, capitalist production in our time, then our behavior is really problematic. because it's not just a question of us needlessly destroying trees, but also just the disposal culture, in the sense that, you know, you buy something and then you use it once and throw it out. And this seems needlessly destructive of resources on this like massive, pervasive level, right? So, so first of all, you have this Baal Tashchit principle. But then secondly, you know, it does say that we were placed in the garden, L'Shomro L'Avda, to guard it and to work it. And so if we have this, if we have this responsible to guard the garden, then it seems like we could, and many people working in the field of Jewish ecology today feel that in that one pasuk, in the one verse, we're told that we have to protect the ecological integrity of the planet, that this is at the very least a Torah principle, and maybe at most a mitzvah, which was not recognized by the pre-modern rabbis because of a limited understanding of ecology, but which we understand, but which we recognize now. And this has led to the creation of something called eco-kashrut. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, you know, but there we have not only people trying to live eco-kashrut, but we have a number of attempts to create actual eco-kosher labels, hechshers, which would go on different foods and products saying that this passes muster. Now, it occurs to me that, you know, like kosher hechshers are very restrictive, and I think an eco-kosher hechsher would be very restrictive as well. Like there are not very many products which would really pass a thorough, you know, just because of the way we do things. But nevertheless, there could be low, you know, and it would be, I mean, it would be fascinating. Wouldn't it be wonderful if there came a day where Vancouver would have its own Iker kosher rabbanut, of a group of people who would look at local products which actually deserved, you know, an eco kosher hechsher. I think that would be awesome. And also, there's also, you know, people who want to have a kosher, oh, sorry, hold on a second. I see there's an issue with the notes. I'm going to attend to that in just a second. People who want to also talk about labor practices. So I think there's a, I can't recall the title of it, and Noam probably does. He may not be able to weigh in, but, and somebody else might as well. But there was a
Hechsher Tzedek.
Yeah, thank you. That's what I was looking for. Hechsher Tzedek. So this is an idea of a hechsher, which actually says that the company has kosher labor practices as well. There's a, you know, and although in the rabbinic tradition, you know, there's some ecological thought, and there's certainly thought about moral responsibility to animals. It's small compared to the amount of time the rabbis took looking at labor practices, which goes back 1,500 years. And there's extensive Jewish writing about labor relations and about the relationship between employees and employers. So we have a huge, massive amount of stuff to draw on there. And so there's also an attempt to bring that to bear. But here we're talking about ecology, so let's stay focused on that. I noticed there's something in the chat happening about notes, and it's possible that probably through my fault that something went wrong with our internal communications in terms of getting those notes up. So I will make sure that they are up on the course page as soon as we're done. If the link is not live, or if there's a problem. We're in class 4 today. Maxine just pointed out that class 3 was up, but I don't, but perhaps the link to class 4 notes is not live. So if it's not live, I'll make sure that it is as soon as we're done. Okay, so I don't actually have a question for today. Probably because I got my booster shot yesterday morning, and I've been a little woozy ever since. So I forgot to put a question in. But maybe a question that we could reflect on is if there's an area in which we could improve our ethical relationship to animals. This is not something you necessarily have to share, although you can if you'd like. I know, you know, speaking for myself, one area which I set out to improve recently, I don't buy, I very rarely buy non-vegan food. My own approach to things is that I if I will eat, if other people give me food, I will eat whatever it is, but I don't buy non-vegan food myself. However, my family does eat meat and cheese. And so I had, recently said, let's actually try to find a cheese which is ethically produced. Well, this is a really hard thing to do. There are some available, but it took a lot of research, and I found that options for ethically produced cheese are minimal. And if anybody has a brilliant option, put it in the chat, because maybe it's something that I haven't found or don't know about. But the conditions on dairy farms do not meet the standards of Jewish law, not even close. And so I was trying to find a dairy farm that you could actually reliably and truly confirm practiced Ba'al Tzarei Chaim, actually avoided unnecessary pain and death to animals, and I found it was extremely difficult. So that's something I'm still questing for. And I don't know if you want to, if anybody wants to share something that's a quest of theirs. It's very, very difficult to do. We're enmeshed in a brutal system of animal exploitation and death. And it's very difficult to extract oneself from it, or to find ways to consume animal products which are ethically responsible. But that's one thing to try. Yeah, and so I see there that Peter, you're saying Daya fake cheese not too bad. I know, I agree, it is not too bad. I found another vegan cheddar, which was not, I forget the name of it right now. Which is not bad. It's not bad. But finding real cheese is really difficult. And Devin, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that. I have had like a long standing sort of back and forth battle with wanting to be totally vegan and sort of meeting a lot of challenges with that. And my sort of stance on it right now is like, in a perfect world, I would be totally vegan, but right now, basically, I go between vegetarian and vegan, and my philosophy is to do the best I can with what I can do, like in the moment. It's just the very best choice that I can make, and not often is it the perfect choice, but it's just my best choice.
I agree. And I mean, I think that's what I was kind of nodding to when I said we're enmeshed in this brutal system, because we really are. It's very difficult to, it's very difficult to say, for instance, I'm going to have nothing to do with animal cruelty or suffering. It's unlikely that one can really find a way to have nothing to do with it. But there's many other things to take into account as well. There's other values, like values of community and being able to eat with other people and things like that, which are also important. So I think that trying to do your best, I agree. I think that's all we can really do, is just to try to reduce it, at least to reduce our involvement in cruelty to animals as much as we can. And yeah, and Cheryl was asking about fish. And it's interesting, I have that thought too. Like if I were to feel that I needed to eat an animal protein, I would buy fish myself. And the reason is simple. There is still cruelty and violence involved, but at least if you're buying wild fish, at least they got to live in the ocean and have a life, rather than being a cow or a chicken kidnapped and living in a box their entire life under horrific conditions. At least they actually got to live a real fish life before they were killed, and that's my thinking sometimes as well. Of course, there's all kinds of issues there, depending on where the fish comes from. Sometimes with, one would probably want to choose fish that didn't have that much, what's the word, collateral damage, like in terms of trawling for tuna and the way that they will sometimes kill huge amounts of animals just to get the tuna. So, I mean, there's still issues there in terms of trying to reduce the violence. But I think that these are exactly the kind of good questions, right? I don't think there's a position of total purity, but these are like the good questions to ask. Well, maybe am I a bit more comfortable eating a fish rather than a factory produced beef? Or, somebody said justification for hunting. I know that some people feel that they would rather hunt a wild animal rather than eat, again, an animal that spent its whole life miserable in a factory. And I can see the argument for that. There's so many issues involved, right? And that's the thing. It's difficult, if not impossible, to get a completely clean answer. And I see that Devin and Susan want to speak. I'm not sure which one put up your hand first, so I'm just going to go with the closest on my screen and say, Devin, do you want to say something first? And then we're almost out of time, so I'll just take these 2 comments and then we'll have to go.
Okay. One thing that I was just thinking about is the ecological argument, as opposed to specifically sort of the animal rights argument, comes up in particular when I'm thinking about conflict between particularly sort of like Western, you want to call that, I use that term, veganism and say indigenous cultures, like thinking about Inuit, the idea that, if you live in Nunavut, a carrot, it doesn't grow there, and it's much more expensive, and that gets into the whole idea of fur trade and that stuff, and the problems with sort of imposing a set of values from outside the ecosystem onto the people who live in the ecosystem and have lived well with it for a long time.
No, absolutely. I think that that's a thorny issue, and I've seen some incredible arguments between vegans and indigenous people, and I for myself, I really see valid concerns on both sides. I have to say, like, I think concern over the animals is just as valid as concern over indigenous rights. So I think that the solution there is probably dialogue, rather, and certainly not yelling at each other, which I've seen way too much of. But it seems to me like this is a question of clashing values, where it's not that one set of values is right and the other one is wrong in some way, but that there's actually 2 sets of authentic and important values coming into some degree of clash. And the only hope, I would think, is for people hopefully to respectfully share their concerns and to discuss with real dialogue and respect, and also acceptance of imperfection. That there's probably not going to be a perfect solution that satisfies everybody. Yeah, thank you very much. And then Susan, did you want to say something?
It's interesting going through this process of figuring out where I belong as a vegetarian or vegan. Growing up in a kosher home, and I thought that was, that was just the way it was growing up. And then I became vegetarian, and walking home from work some days in the summer when there'd be a barbecue, and you'd go, that smells so good. And then when it hit my head, it was like, no. But it just kind of happened without my thinking. But then I had fish for a long time. And a couple of years ago, I had a bit of an aha moment when I was in just outside of Portland, and I was looking at the fish jumping up the fish ladder, and you kind of go, these fish are working so hard to do what fish do. How can I want to eat one of them, kill them and eat them? So somehow that really hit me as these are not just fish that I can ignore.
Right.
So
yeah, no,
it's hard.
That's the question. That's a great phrasing of the question. Absolutely. And especially, just to say quickly, there's an amazing book called What Fish Know. I don't know if you haven't read it, I really recommend it, although it's a difficult read, because it turns out that fish know a lot more than we think they do. And so it can be an interesting voyage into widening our ethical concern in a way which can be uncomfortable, but also totally fascinating. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody, for coming together. And I'll just very quickly bless us that we may all find wisdom in ways to reduce our violent relationship with animals in whatever way we can and whatever way makes sense to us. And may we realize that we're doing this according to our lights as we learn more and think more. We're not going to be perfect because the problem is too vast and pervasive for any of us to achieve any kind of purity, but may we all have wisdom in taking steps to come into a more respectful and wise relationship with our animal family. And may we also be patient and compassionate with ourselves and others as we work this out, and sometimes in ways which are different from our neighbors. All right, so thank you everybody for gathering together. And I will look forward very much to our final class tomorrow, where we're going to move beyond the animal into fascinating realms. And right now I'm going to go and check in with Duggan and see if I did something wrong with the notes today. And so it should be up soon. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.